dissertation, which I completed as part of a master's in TESOL Leadership and Management through the University of Portsmouth. This webinar focuses on the role of the academic manager or director of studies in English language teaching organizations, and the initial training available for teachers who move into a management role from the classroom. I'm going to share with you the findings of my research around academic manager feelings of self-efficacy, and finally discuss some ways that teachers moving into management roles can provide for their own well-being through self-assessment and by joining professional communities of practice. So my curiosity about this topic was piqued. What kind of training is most helpful for new academic managers, and what perhaps is missing from that training, by of course finding myself in the common enough position of being a teacher and then wanting to develop as a teacher, looking around for professional development opportunities, doing a certificate here, another certificate there, eventually completing the Delta. My Delta Module 3 specialization was in CLIL for young learners. And from there, I was finally approached to become a director of studies. I wonder how many of you here today have been in the same situation. Has this happened to you? Are you thinking that it may happen to you? What kind of experience have you had around this? Because I think talking to senior teachers, directors of studies, this happens quite a lot, where your organic development over time leads you quite often to take on more senior roles and more management roles, even if your background is not in management. As you're all very aware, the language teaching organizations have developed over the years as a response to the global need for English language proficiency, and they're a vital part of the global education industry as a whole. According to data collected by Proficient Market Insights last year, by the end of 2030, so only 7 years away now, the global ELT market size is predicted to have a value of $36,470 billion US. It's massive. English is taught on every continent, with the market being divided geographically: the Americas, Europe, Asia Pacific, the Middle East, Africa, by target learner. So we have business English, general adults English, academic, teenagers, young learners, very young learners. Even now there's a growing market for the, let's say, geriatric learners, so people who come back to language learning in their 70s. We also have the market divided by delivery method. So obviously the traditional in-class face-to-face, and with the explosion, the pandemic, now we all know about hybrid lessons, virtual, synchronous, asynchronous, artificial intelligence, other technologies. And this expansion has resulted in an increased demand for professional English language teachers. And as ELTs expanded globally and has become more professional, the need for trained managers has also grown. So there's an increased focus on quality, efficiency, and a developing emphasis on ELT as a service industry. And this is this goes hand in hand with attempts to standardize delivery of ELT across diverse contexts to meet the requirements of international standardized examinations of language ability. So Lou mentioned that I began teaching in the 1990s, and in that period, there was a call, let's say, to recognize those in positions of like a director of studies to be recognized as academic managers. So to recognize the role of management management theories and management methods, let's say, in this position. And at that time, the first book on ELT management was published. I'm pretty sure a lot of you will be familiar with this book. Then over time, of course, our society changed. There's a massive change from the 1990s to the 2000s with the introduction of the internet and the growing globalization of our entire society. And so in 2008, as a response to this, and also in recognition of the way that teachers who had begun as just ELT teachers were beginning to move into this management role, a new book came out, which is now a standard textbook for people in our position who are teachers moving into management, or people who find themselves in the role of a manager in the ELT world and would like to know more about it. Okay, and there's a growing body of literature that recognizes the importance of initial management training in ELT when teachers move from their classroom role to one of academic manager or director of studies. However, during my dissertation, I found that there is very little research available that investigates the effectiveness of this initial training, and empirical research is still scarce. Although the position of academic manager or director of studies has been mentioned in ELT journals since at least the 1990s, many DOSs are still accidental. They're assigned the position owing to their teaching experience or expertise, or they just gradually assume more responsibility as the demands increased within the organization. That's the 1990s, but the results of my small case study imply that this is still the situation. And this means that many directors of studies experience imposter syndrome. They feel underqualified for the position. They always have a doubt in the back of their mind if they really know what they're doing. They also tend to think that their efforts will never fully be 100% successful. This organic shifting into a management role without the benefit of training can have an impact on the sense of self-efficacy and new manager experiences, and this in turn impacts on mental well-being. We hear a lot about directors of studies, academic managers being responsible for the well-being of teachers, and I always have a question about who's taking care of the well-being of the managers. Now, that was another thing that I was looking at in my dissertation, is how the training we receive as academic managers impacts our own well-being. So let's define self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is a key psychological concept that can aid in the explanation and prediction of effectiveness in the workplace. According to Albert Bandura, who is an influential social cognitive psychologist, self-efficacy is defined as the belief in one's capabilities to organize and execute the courses of actions required to manage prospective situations. And in Bandura's original model, self-efficacy beliefs are drawn from four major sources: mastery experiences, vicarious experiences, verbal persuasion, and psychological, physiological, and affective states. The most important source of self-efficacy comes from mastery experiences. There's a positive feedback loop between performance and self-efficacy beliefs. So the better a person performs, the more effective, more efficacious they become. This increased efficacy encourage people to take on more challenging objectives and tasks, which then raises performance levels in the long run. So it's, let's say, a virtuous cycle when things are going well, but if things are not going so well, it can become a vicious cycle with your self-belief, your belief in your ability to do the job suffering over time. And this is where it's very important for new academic managers to have someone they can talk to about these situations, a mentor or a coach. So highly successful teachers generally have high self-efficacy, which means that they strongly believe in their own capacity to perform their job well. When these teachers cross the border into leadership positions, they may have a period where their sense of self-efficacy drops. And this is quite disorientating. You've been an expert for years, and then suddenly you're in a position of not being an expert anymore and having to learn, and there's a very steep learning curve. So this is the moment, as I said, when a teacher in this position, or now a new academic manager, has need of direct support and training, very targeted training. So most ELT academic management training courses cover the core competencies, and they usually attempt to help teachers notice and acknowledge which skills they may transfer from the classroom to their new role. However, my research revealed some elements which new academic managers feel were missing from their initial training. Some of these skills are mentioned in similar studies, while others perhaps are more relevant to the global situation at the time of writing, which was in the COVID pandemic. And this COVID pandemic, as we all know, has created different ways of working and a higher need for resilience in academic managers than ever before. So one takeaway I would say from this webinar today is that more work needs to be done in this area, more action research, more small scale, more small case studies to ensure that the initial training offered, whether it's on the job or via training courses, is delivering the most useful knowledge and understandings to those teachers moving into a managerial role, to ensure that they have a high level of preparedness, a clear understanding of how their teaching experience can be utilized in their new position, and to bridge the knowledge gaps which are likely to exist. Okay, let's talk about role diversity. The demands on an academic manager in an English language teaching organization are, I think we can all agree, unique and very specific to the domain of English language teaching. During my research, I analyzed recent job advertisements for directors of studies, and the list of requirements was truly astounding. Two recent job advertisements for the role create a clear picture of the varied and demanding expectations for this role. Both schools require an initial degree, CELTA, Cambridge Delta or equivalent, so that Delta is a minimum qualification. Beyond that, they highlight the skills needed. Excellent interpersonal skills, including being able to motivate staff, time management and organizational skills, hardworking, accurate, stay calm under pressure, be innovative, be an experienced and inspirational classroom teacher. The hard skills include IT knowledge, financial and resource management. Domain-specific knowledge is a deep understanding of course and curriculum design, as well as safeguarding and pastoral care. Okay, it must be said that neither of these jobs were aiming at a teacher transitioning from the classroom, but rather towards someone who has already had considerable academic management experience. However, they do serve to underline just how demanding the role can be, and perhaps may explain why the lack of insistence on initial training for teachers moving into the role is so concerning. So at this point in time, there's still no standard for who can become a director of studies. So how does a competent ELT teacher learn to be an effective ELT manager? While in 2016, Rimmer, one of the authors, was able to state there's no requisite training needed to assume an ELT management position. The industry is certainly moving towards more standardization in general, as evidenced by the establishment of professional organizations such as Equals, IATEFL, and the TESOL International Association. And now, for example, IATEFL has a leadership and management SIG, a special interest group, and Equals has an increasing emphasis on excellence in academic management, and I'll talk more about that soon. Let's have a look at a few of the training courses available for those who wish to manage in an English language teaching organization. So for my dissertation, the three that I looked at specifically were the English UK Diploma in English Language Teaching Management, the International House Director of Studies course, and the Masters in TESOL Leadership and Management course through Portsmouth. Despite variances in emphasis and focus, the material supplied in all syllabi demonstrates a strong connection across the course content. Each of the three courses surveyed offers from 10 to 12 themes. There are some commonalities and some quite important differences between the three courses. All three have a module on change management. And this is quite interesting because the Delta Module 3 ELT management assignment also focuses on change management. They all three also have a module on human resource management, including appraisals, recruitment, and observations. And they also all focus on the customer journey. Okay, so maintaining and enhancing the quality of teaching and learning, customer journey, customer satisfaction. Only the English UK and the International House courses have modules on marketing and finance, although the master's course through Portsmouth does have a separate module on finance and marketing. And only the University of Portsmouth course has modules on transitioning from teacher to manager and strategic management, although I'm sure that the other two courses address the transition in one of their modules. And finally, only the International House course has a specific module on time management. Other modules include communication, conducting observations, and developing a global mindset. So these then seem to be the key themes which a manager should understand to effectively lead an LTO. So I'm going to share with you now the research questions that guided my dissertation. I had three main questions. One looking at the initial training and continued professional development, then the sense of preparedness that DOSs had going into the role, and then perhaps what should be added, what could be added to training to address the perceived lacks. All right, so the way I carried out my research was through a small case study. In order to find participants, I used an active recruiting process. This means that a researcher approaches and engages with particular people with the intention of enlisting them in the study, typically on the basis of knowledge of traits that would make them appropriate participants for the particular study. Social media, of course, has become an increasingly important tool for recruitment into research projects, and this was no exception. I used WhatsApp to find participants for the study. I solicited members of the Association of Language Schools in Italy, who are part of a WhatsApp group for ISLE academic managers, and I'm a member of that group. 19 people responded to the survey, and I had 7 follow-up interviews. So let's look at who these people are. Okay, you can read there. They came from all over. They all worked for ELT, for schools in Italy, but one was also working for a summer school in the United Kingdom. So the case study is very specific to Italy. I asked the participants about their initial education and training. Only one participant did not have an initial degree. 10 had a degree in an unrelated subject. 6 had a degree related to English language teaching, and 2 had postgraduate degrees or specializations above the undergraduate degree level. No participants had studied management in any way as part of their initial training, as part of their university degrees. I asked the participants how long they'd been teaching before they moved into management. No participants had had less than a year of teaching. Oh, sorry. Yeah. None had had less than a year. 3 had had only 2 to 3 years of teaching before moving into management. And the others had all had at least 5 years of classroom teaching before transitioning into management. There was a huge variation of job titles, as you can see, 8 different names for the role, but the most common is Director of Studies. The most common type of ELTO was a private language school in a city. Those generally had between 6 and 15 teachers. 3 reported having 20 or more teachers, and between 3 and 5 people working in management. Just over half of the ELTOs had a separate teacher training department, and 67 of the participants said that their role was considered to be part of that department. So part of their role was trainer. Interestingly, when describing their teaching organization, half of the respondents mentioned that their role and status within their schools would vary depending on the specific country and institution where they work. One respondent talked about this situation, saying that certain skills are more important in some geographical and organizational cultures than others. Another interviewee said that they had identified significant differences upon their arrival in Italy and highlighted that an understanding of the context and an ability to adapt behavior to fit the context is one of the most important skills a Director of Studies can have. On the other hand, and one interviewee mentioned that they perceived the role to consist, excuse me, of fundamentally the same duties in different schools. So there is, I think this comes from one's own experience of the role, how it works in different schools. And furthermore, it's worth mentioning that just over 90% of the participants seem to agree that the organization's size, location, and association with a franchise has impacted the extent to which they've been trained or not, particularly because these factors determine the resources allocated to continuous professional development and the expectations of their learning community. When I first started looking into what kind of training was available for new academic managers, I found that Clyde Bell's article from the year 2000 was standard reading. I think you've probably all read this. This is about teacher perceptions of the skills transfer from teaching to managing. And in the survey for my research, I asked very similar questions, as I wanted to see if very much has changed in the intervening 2 decades. And as it turns out, not much has changed at all. It was very interesting to see the results of this exercise. Many respondents felt that there was a large transfer of skills, except in areas of financial management, marketing, and to a lesser extent, long-term planning. In follow-up interviews, several respondents mentioned this question as having made them reflect on their skill set. And one mentioned that at the beginning of the transition, it would have been difficult to identify their useful competencies, but what they found after a little time in the role, that some of the skills that they developed as a teacher were very, very useful in the position as Director of Studies as well. I then asked which skills they felt teaching had most prepared them for. And they ranked them from most to least, the management skills. And the results are shown in the following two tables. So to come up with the final ranking score, each chosen score was multiplied by the number of respondents who chose that number to arrive at a total for ranking purposes. And this ranking is very, very close to what Clyde Fell's respondents came up with in the year 2000. So effective listening, establishing rapport, presenting ideas clearly, communication skills, okay, all the way down to managing people. And then the management skills least prepared for through teaching, managing stress, emotive issues, belligerence, and then finally financial management and marketing. One respondent stated that in terms of managing people and teams, she had no experience whatsoever, because it's true that there are some levels of skills that we apply in the classroom, especially if it's with a group, but the dynamics in a classroom, which are teacher to students, are very different from Director of Studies to teachers. 5 respondents stressed the fact that their time teaching had allowed them to develop excellent communication skills, and 4 mentioned establishing rapport and listening. They all seemed to agree with a participant who said, "I feel most confident in communicating effectively, motivating people, setting a good example of leadership, and establishing a rapport." So they're the soft skills that we bring from our teaching experience. Overall, while most respondents seem to have perceived that the communication and interpersonal skills that they had developed as teachers were not difficult to extrapolate to their new position, they recognized emotional intelligence as a major factor that provoked distress, followed by their need to assert their authority and manage technical issues such as finance and the promotion of courses within their learning communities. So, how do we grow in the role? Well, another major aspect that was raised through the survey and follow-up interviews was the existing issues that professionals faced, whether they had received formal onboarding or not. There's a sort of ad hoc approach to continuous professional development, which perhaps arises from the initial lacks in training. As we grow in the role, we begin to recognize where those lacks may be and seek out further development. One participant remarked that it took her at least 3 full years to have an idea of what the job entails. That's even with visits to other schools, possibilities to ask questions, to attend conferences and any courses. When being asked whether they felt prepared for the role, one Director of Studies answered that she didn't think she felt prepared. She was offered the job after a couple of years helping a previous DOS and just went with the flow. Another one voiced that they found obstacles with the whole aspect of working with people and the importance of listening to both clients and teachers, as well as developing management styles. Additionally, half of the participants agreed that it would have been useful to have more clarity in the financial aspects of running the school, marketing, and something that came up time and time again was how to have difficult conversations. There's another issue around how to differentiate continuous professional development for teachers with differing levels of experience, and that ties back to the fact that part of the role of DOS is often as a teacher trainer. And things such as planning for courses and timetabling, which they've never had to consider before as a teacher. Going back to the organic nature or moving into a DOS role organically or by accident, one DOS described her situation as just having to carve out the role as she went along because there hadn't been a DOS before. And this may be a common experience. I certainly know that it's mine. In essence, well over 80% of the participants indicated that after being appointed, they needed a considerable amount of time to feel at ease with the status and roles that the position entails. Furthermore, shadowing a senior member of staff seems to have been a common activity, but it's been stated that the mere fact of doing so was not necessarily enough to provide them with the skills they needed. A quarter of the participants also reported that they would still find it helpful to receive further hands-on CPD that addresses the areas included in the following table. It's a lot. So even with initial training, as we develop in the role, we realize that we still need more information about some of these areas. Self-management, dealing with stress, finding work-life balance. That was a big one that came out. And I know it's something that teachers have to deal with as well. It doesn't change when we become managers. Perhaps it even intensifies. Now let's look at manager self-efficacy. Overall, the respondents reported high self-efficacy for key duties, such as observing lessons, representing their school, and working collaboratively. And indeed, one respondent reported that planning with the teachers is one of her strengths. She said that she feels most confident with planning and listening to the concerns of her teaching team because she'd already been assisting them in this previously, and it was second nature to want to help them still. Another said creating rapport and team building was one of her strengths, one of her areas of self-efficacy. With a good relationship in place with her team, she was allowed to make mistakes and learn from them in other areas. Where there was lower self-efficacy, managing stress, time, workload scored low, and several respondents mentioned that a lack of these skills impacted their work-life balance in a negative way. Someone commented that she's not naturally an organized person, doesn't naturally have good time management skills, and was having to learn that on the job. That's a very practical thing, not necessarily able to be taught through any initial training. If it's not part of who you are already, it's a skill that you need to develop. She described it as an extra obstacle that she needed to overcome on top of everything else. So what were the key findings from the study? The training courses available currently for academic management cover the most important tasks and competencies for the role, as well as providing a background to management and leadership theories and concrete examples of what management of an ELTO entails. The issue seems to be more that new academic managers don't necessarily access those courses before they take on the job, but rather after they've been in the role for some time and have identified their lacks. On top of this, considering that most participants believed each school to be a peculiar microcosm in terms of their community, learning objectives, corporate culture, and value proposition in their corresponding area, it may be identified that the general nature of some courses on the market may need to be evaluated and tailored to the specific context of the ELTOs to render them valid. Conversely, in view of this, course providers would need to devote resources to differentiating and offering meaningful context, perhaps by conducting a needs analysis before the course begins or during the first week. It has to be said that these courses do allow for a large amount of personalization through assignments. Another way of learning the role is shadowing an extant manager, although the data collected shows that this scenario within the participants' organizations is not very common. More often than not, according to the participants, the teacher is moving into an empty position or one which has been newly created. ELT academic managers are likely to have read one or more of the key texts, such as the ones written by White and Rosner, but having a management qualification seems to be a less important requirement for getting the job than actually being present in the ELTO when the need for an academic manager arises. Right place, right time. The job advertisements, which were analysed, were chosen as representative of advertisements found on ELT recruitment websites. They required that the candidates be qualified, mentioned the Cambridge Delta and the UK Deltem as minimum requirements for the role. They both require extensive experience in managing teams, as well as a strong understanding of English language teaching practices and second language acquisition. The list of both hard skills and soft skills required by both jobs are exhaustive, and according to the participants, certainly would not be gained just from classroom experience, which means that a teacher without managerial experience is not the ideal candidate. But this doesn't reflect the findings of the questionnaire and interview, in which the majority of academic managers transitioned into the role without a background in management and had to learn the necessary skills on the job. The data also suggests that it takes some time for a teacher to settle into the role of manager and adjust to new relationships with colleagues, with students, and other stakeholders. The analysis identifies that it's very helpful for new managers to reflect on the skills they bring from their classroom experience and to understand how they might be used in this new context, as it's not always clear and it might need to be made explicit. Yet the need to bridge the gap between theory and practice remains a significant challenge for new academic managers. And this is where a coach or mentor can be very helpful. Alongside the expected areas found in the extent courses, academic managers would like to know more about having difficult conversations and dealing with conflict, project management, dealing with stress, and work-life balance. This seems to indicate that notwithstanding the fact that teaching seems to have provided them with valuable skills to communicate, a major area to be developed has to do with applied aspects of emotional intelligence, particularly abilities related to asserting their authority when addressing colleagues, and also best practices to promote well-being. Thus, it would be relevant that attention be given to such topics in prospective sessions for continuous professional development for pre-service and in-service academic managers. An important issue for future action seems to be the progression and framework used to support prospective and in-service academic managers. While there seems to be agreement on basic learning objectives, there's limited guidance on how to hone these skills once they've been acquired, and that's where the Equals Academic Management Competency Framework comes in. I'm assuming you're all familiar with this, but if you're not familiar with it, it's worth looking it up on the Equals website. It's fairly new. In fact, when I met Lou, she was talking to a group of directors of studies about this framework. Equals developed their academic management competency framework in 2021, and it's been designed to provide guiding principles and tools for managers, which will contribute to the enhancement of quality in language teaching and learning. It covers 8 key areas, which you can see on this slide. And these areas, these categories, align with the findings of the training course outlines, the key texts and job advertisements: managing self, people and systems and processes, professional development, course and assessment design, planning and administration, managing resources, change management, quality and customer service, and marketing. So while this framework does not train an academic manager nor assess training effectiveness, it does enable someone in the role to reflect on their abilities in a systematic way, their strengths, weaknesses, and from this, they might be able to approach their line manager or school director to request specific training to address any competency gaps. This example is one that I created based on my own reflection during the completion of my dissertation. It came out a little late for me to fully incorporate it into my research, but it's a highly effective tool for self-assessment and as a lead-in for conversations around training needs. So I have a question for you. Have you heard about the silo effect or silo mentality? Okay, a silo mentality at work refers to a mindset that keeps information contained within a narrow part of the organization. And another term for this is the balkanization. And we often hear about this in schools where teachers work in isolation without sharing their ideas or collaborating to create units of work with colleagues. And it's not usually intentional. This can also happen to directors of studies, especially in smaller schools where they might be alone, not part of a larger management team, no assistant DOS. And in this case, it's vital that the academic manager searches out their own professional learning community. A professional learning community for academic managers creates a space for creative collaboration, the sharing of ideas for best practice, and a chance to improve their individual and collective effect on the teaching and learning happening in their particular school. So where can academic managers find or develop a PLC? So the work in this area by the various organizations that I've mentioned, such as ISLE, IATEFL, Equals, any national country-specific groups, go a long way towards standardizing the role of the academic manager. And they also offer resources and training for those holding the position. And they're a wonderful opportunity to develop and build communities of practice, where those in the role can share ideas and support one another to grow in the role. However, more must be done to recognize that teachers, no matter how effective they are in the classroom, do not necessarily have the required competencies to be immediately effective as managers. Further research should be undertaken to investigate the long-term impact of the adoption of self-reporting frameworks such as the Equals AMCF on academic manager self-efficacy and the impact of initial training. Thank you for your attention.